senior clergy. Henry's early years had been spent in the shadow of an anxious and overprotective father, intent before anything else on securing the dynasty. The young prince never spoke in public, except in reply to questions from the king. He could leave the palace at Greenwich or at Eltham only under careful supervision, and then venture into the palace's park through a private door. Much care was bestowed on his early education, so that he acquired the reputation of being the most learned of princes. Throughout his life he considered himself to be a great debater in matters of theology, fully steeped in the scholarship of Thomas Aquinas. He took an early delight in music, and composed masses as well as songs and motets. He sang and played both lute and keyboard. He had his own company of musicians who followed him wherever he walked, and by the time of his death he owned 72 flutes. He was the harmonious prince. Thomas More, in a poem celebrating the coronation, described him as the glory of the era. Surely he would inaugurate a new golden age in which all men of goodwill would flourish. Henry was himself a golden youth, robust and good-looking. He was a little over 6 feet in height, and literally towered over most of his subjects. It was written that, when he moves, the ground shakes under him. He excelled in wrestling and archery, hawking and jousting. 9 months after the coronation he organized a tournament in which the feats of chivalry could be celebrated. He rode out in disguise, but his identity was soon discovered. He had read Malory as well as Aquinas, and knew well enough that a good king was a brave and aggressive king. You had to strike down your opponent with a lance or sword. You must not hesitate or draw back. It was a question of honor. The joust offered a taste of warfare also, and the new king surrounded himself with young lords who enjoyed a good fight. The noblemen of England were eager to stiffen the sinews and summon up the blood. When he was not master of the joust, he was leader of the hunt. He spoke of his hunting expeditions for days afterwards, and he would eventually own a stable of 200 horses. Hunting was and still is the sport of kings. It was a form of war against an enemy, a battleground upon which speed and accuracy were essential. Henry would call out, "Holla! Holla! So, boy! There, boy!" When the stag was down he would slit its throat and cut open its belly before thrusting his hands into its entrails. He would then daub his companions with its blood. Older and more sedate men were also by his side. These were the royal councillors, the majority of whom had served under the previous king. The Archbishop of Canterbury, William Warham, remained as Chancellor. The Bishop of Winchester, Richard Fox, continued to serve as Lord Privy Seal. The other senior bishops, of Durham, of Rochester, and of Norwich, were also in place. The young king had to be advised and guided if the kingdom were to continue on its settled course. Whether he would accept that advice and follow that guidance was another matter. The surviving members of the House of York were restored to favour after they had endured the indifference and even hostility of the previous king. Henry VII had identified himself as the Lancastrian claimant to the throne. Even though he had married Elizabeth of York after his coronation, he was suspicious and resentful of the rival royal family. The essential unity of the realm was now being proclaimed after the dynastic struggles of the previous century. The older councillors now took the opportunity of destroying some of the new men whom Henry VII had promoted. His 2 most trusted advisers, or confidential clerks, were arrested and imprisoned. Sir Richard Empson and Sir Edmund Dudley had been associated with the previous king's financial exactions, and they were in general resented and distrusted by the bishops and older nobility. They were charged with the unlikely crime of constructive treason against the young king, and were duly executed. It is not at all clear that Henry played any part in what was essentially judicial murder, but his formal approval was still necessary. He would employ the same methods for removing his enemies.